They say some people are invisible, but maybe it's not them. Maybe it's us who refuse to see Dot in a city built on polished glass and silent judgment. One man in a wheelchair, one forgotten dog, and one brave little girl remind us what dignity looks like when the world forgets your name. This story isn't about fame, or fortune, or power. It's about the quiet kind of courage, the kind that sits in the back, cleans up after others, and still chooses to show up. Dot, if stories like these matter to you, take a second to subscribe. Because sometimes the smallest voices carry the loudest truths. Asterisk, there are certain streets in the city that speak without words. Maple Avenue was one of them. On a map, it looked just like any other street, 2 lanes running east to west, flanked by stores with names that started with and ended with bar or boutique. Coffee shops with chalkboard menus, Tesla charging stations, and the occasional yoga class spilling out onto the sidewalk on weekends. But to Carl Anderson, Maple Avenue was a line between who gets seen and who disappears. The morning began like most others. Light filtered through the narrow blinds of the shelter's front window. Carl, already awake, sat in silence on the edge of his cot, tying the laces of shoes that had long given up on staying white. Next to him, Samson, the old German shepherd, stretched with a groan, his bones cracking in protest like a symphony of age. Carl patted his back gently. "You ready, boy?" Samson gave a half-hearted tail wag and slowly rose, limping on his back leg. His vest, once crisp and dark with bold K9 unit lettering, was now faded, frayed at the edges, but still buckled tight like a memory that wouldn't let go. They rolled out together. Carl's wheelchair squeaked slightly with every 5th push, and the sidewalk on 9th Street was as uneven as ever. But that was their route. That was their ritual. Stop by the corner bodega, grab a coffee if the machine wasn't broken, and make it to Millstone Elementary before the kids arrived. Custodian duty began at 6:45 a.m. sharp, and Carl was never late. Not because anyone would care, but because it was the only thing left in the city that still depended on him. When they turned onto Maple, the world changed. It always did. This part of town shimmered differently in the morning sun. The pavement here wasn't cracked. The trash cans weren't overflowing. The trees were actually trimmed, and the benches didn't have spikes on them to keep people like Carl from resting. Samson walked a little slower here. Maybe it was the memories. Maybe it was the stairs. Because here's the thing: people didn't look at Carl to see him. They looked at him to categorize him, not to decide, in one fast flick of the eye, where he belonged. And more importantly, where he didn't. A silver Rolls-Royce eased up to the red light on the corner. Its mirror-like surface reflected the dull gray of Carl's jacket and the bent wheels of his chair. The driver didn't glance over. He didn't need to. His existence didn't make room for Carl's. Carl didn't expect acknowledgement. Not anymore. But he noticed something else. Across the street, a woman and her daughter had just exited the bakery, their 2 go-cups steaming in the morning air. The little girl, curly hair bouncing under a pink beanie, was mid-sentence when her eyes caught Samson. Her mouth paused in surprise, not fear, just innocent curiosity. She pointed, but before she could speak, her mother saw Carl, and just like that, the moment changed. Her fingers tightened around the girl's wrist. She said nothing, but her body did all the talking. A quick tug, a sharp pivot. She led her daughter across the street, away from Carl, away from Samson. Not a scream, not a word, just a choice. As if dignity was contagious, and she didn't want her child catching it from the wrong kind of man. Carl sighed. He'd seen that move 100 times. Maybe more. From teachers, from businessmen, from joggers in Lululemon pants. It wasn't violent. It wasn't loud. But it told a story that went. You don't belong here. You are not one of us. You are not safe. You are not welcome. But Carl didn't flinch. He didn't shout. He didn't defend. Because what would be the point? Invisibility doesn't argue. He simply pushed forward. Samson walked closer to his side now, perhaps sensing his mood. Dogs had a way of knowing what people couldn't be bothered to feel. As they rolled by the bakery's side window, Carl caught his own reflection. Not the soldier. Not the father. Not the man who once saved lives in a sandstorm outside Fallujah. Just a man in a wheelchair. A dog. A janitor. A burden. A blur. His eyes drifted back toward the Rolls-Royce. The light turned green. The car eased forward. Behind its tinted windows, a man in a tailored suit leaned back, completely unaware that just 5 feet away, a veteran with a medal tucked inside his coat was being erased one glance at a time. Carl didn't hate the man. That was the hard part. He didn't even feel angry. He just felt tired, because you can't yell at a system. You can't argue with a sidewalk. You can't demand to be seen by people who were raised to look through you. Up ahead, Millstone Elementary came into view. Kids were starting to gather at the gate. Parents hovered nearby, some still on phone calls, others adjusting backpacks or wiping crumbs from their children's lips. A young teacher passed Carl without making eye contact and offered a quick, forced smile. Not the warm kind, not the kind you give a crossing guard or a stop sign. He parked Samson in his usual corner and wheeled inside. The school was awake, lights humming, intercom buzzing, the world moving, and Carl got to work, sweeping floors, replacing trash bags, picking up dropped folders and forgotten juice boxes. He moved quietly, like a ghost in a familiar hallway, not because he wanted to go unseen, but because that's how they preferred it. Mr. Anderson? The voice came from behind him, small, soft. It was Amira, a girl barely 9, with deep brown eyes and a backpack almost bigger than she was. He turned, surprised. "Morning, sweetheart," she smiled. Not the kind adults gave out of politeness, but the kind kids give when they mean it. "Can I pet Samson today?" He paused, then nodded. Just gentle, like always. She knelt beside the dog, her hand brushing over Samson's fur with a mix of fear and love. The dog licked her wrist. She giggled. Carl smiled too. For the first time that morning, and in that brief second, he wasn't invisible. He was Carl. A man. A name. A friend. A guardian. Even if it was just in one little girl's eyes. Some stories don't start with a bang. Some begin in the silence between a car window and a glance, between a sidewalk and a sidestep, between a man and a child. This was one of those stories, and it had only just begun. In Millstone Elementary's staff directory, Carl Anderson's name wasn't listed. He didn't have a school email. No bio on the website. No framed photo on the team wall near the front office. But if you came in before sunrise or after, the last bell rang, Carl was the one unlocking doors, mopping floors, and making sure the building smelled like lemon cleaner instead of childhood chaos. He was always there, just not on paper. Even his employee badge read, Maintenance Access. Only no title, no department. Just a barcode and a laminated smile from 10 years ago, before the deep lines had made a home beneath his eyes. After the children flooded in and settled into their classrooms, Carl would retreat to his quiet routines, emptying bins, checking sinks, scraping gum off the underside of desks like he was peeling away forgotten truths. Samson followed him through the halls like a loyal ghost, his paws silent on the linoleum in the supply closet. Carl had a chair no one knew about, an old milk crate he'd turned into a seat with an extra janitor's jacket folded on top. This was his break room, his office, his church. Sometimes he'd just sit there, holding a paper coffee cup too long gone cold, and think about the war. Not the gunfire or the sand, but the coming home part, the way everything seemed louder, faster, and far less grateful than what the recruiter had promised. He remembered the silence in the airport terminal, the nurse who avoided his eyes when she handed him the discharge papers, and the job counselor who said, "You know, janitorial work isn't a bad place to start." He remembered thinking, start where? A few blocks away, Amira Hassan walked to school the same way every day, quietly. Sneakers were worn, the right toe peeled open like a mouth trying to speak. Her backpack used to be pink, but had faded into a dull blush, with one broken zipper and a Hello Kitty keychain swinging like a relic from a better life. She lived with her grandmother, Layla, in apartment 3B of the Oakview complex. Her parents had been gone for years. Some people said deportation, others whispered darker things, but Amira never asked for clarity. She'd learned young. Answers didn't always fix the ache. Layla was kind, fierce too. Her hands were always busy sewing, stirring, soothing. But her health had been slipping. Her knees were brittle, and her memory cracked sometimes. The fridge was often empty except for mustard, tortillas, and some mysterious Tupperware from 2 weeks ago. Most mornings, Layla would press a kiss to Amira's forehead and say, "Walk fast, smile small, and stay unseen." It was how you survived in a city that never asked your name. At school, Amira made herself small. She kept her head down, her voice low, and her answers safe. She never wanted to be first, or last, or memorable. That's how kids like her got labeled troublemaker, ESL, behavioral risk, might need counseling. But on the second Tuesday of every month, Amira would sneak into the janitor's closet during lunch. Not for mischief, for Samson. Carl always left the door cracked, and the dog waited just inside. He'd wag his tail once, and nuzzle her hand gently, like she was someone who mattered. She'd feed him crusts of bread, or the occasional apple slice. In return, Samson would sit beside her in the stillness, as if guarding something precious and breakable. And sometimes, just sometimes, Carl would speak. Not much, just enough. He still remembers commands in Arabic, you know, Carl once said, adjusting Samson's vest. Amira blinked. Really? Yeah, from the war. We worked with translators. Dogs are smart like that. They remember who helped them. Amira had smiled at that. No one ever remembered who helped them. Carl saw her, not just her clothes or her quiet. He saw the silence she carried. It was a familiar kind of silence, the kind you wear like a second skin, the kind you learn to live with when people constantly look past you or through you. They had that in common. He didn't know her full story. She didn't know his. But in that supply closet, with the buzz of an old light bulb and Samson's breathing as background music, they found a kind of peace. Not safety, but recognition. One Thursday, Carl heard two teachers whispering in the break room as he mopped outside the door. That janitor's still bringing that dog around. Isn't that like a violation or something? I heard he just keeps him because no one else will. Probably. Doesn't even live anywhere. Poor girl Amira. She's always around them. Maybe that's why she's so off. Carl froze. They weren't being cruel. Not openly, but they weren't being kind either. And in that moment, he was reminded how quick people are to define others without ever asking their names. Carl had once been Sergeant Anderson. Then he was patient 84,179. Then maintenance. ID #3321. His first name had become optional. His story reduced to a clipboard line in Human Resources. Amira? She was that kid from 3B. No one remembered her birthday. No one knew she played violin in secret. No one asked why she always sat near the emergency exit during assemblies. Were ghosts in a building full of living people. And yet, they showed up. They worked. They learned. They gave, even when the world didn't give back. Later that day, Amira dropped her pencil pouch in the hallway. Everything spilled: erasers, markers, even the paper crane she kept tucked inside for good luck. Carl bent down to help. So did Samson, sniffing at the tiny chaos. A boy nearby snorted. Bet she's used to trash. Her house probably looks like that. The words hit harder than any shove. Carl's jaw clenched. But Amira just gathered her things quickly, her hands shaking. No tears. Just that same practiced silence. Carl didn't speak. Instead, he placed the crane back in her palm. You fold this? She nodded. Then it's not trash. It's art. She looked at him, stunned for a second, then smiled. And for that moment, she existed fully. Some people live loud. Some live long. But some live in the margins, between whispers and assumptions. Carl and Amira were never loud. They were never on the marquee. But every day, they showed up in the spaces most of us don't even look at. And that kind of quiet bravery, it deserves to be remembered. A cafeteria at Millstone Elementary smelled like ketchup, sweat, and childhood. It buzzed with the noise of hundreds of conversations happening at once, plastic trays clattering, sneakers squeaking on linoleum, the occasional shriek of laughter, or the whistle of a lunch monitor cutting through the din like a referee. For most kids, it was just another Thursday. But for Amira, Thursdays meant spaghetti, and spaghetti meant danger. Her grandmother packed her lunches carefully, always tried to make them warm, even when the microwave at the shelter wasn't working right. Today's meal was a leftover plastic container filled with overcooked spaghetti and tomato sauce, sealed tight with 2 rubber bands. No fancy thermos. No cartoon characters on the lid. Just food. Food made with love. Food they could barely afford. I walked carefully through the lunchroom, eyes focused on the tray in her hands. Her sneakers had no traction left, and the sauce inside her container sloshed from side to side like it knew it didn't belong here. She spotted an empty spot at the edge of table 7 near the end, close to the trash bins. That was her usual place, the unofficial table for kids no one really wanted to sit next to, but didn't actively bully. Unless they were bored. She was almost there. Almost safe. Then it happened. A shoulder bigger than hers, moving too fast, bumped her from behind. Just enough force. Just enough carelessness. Just enough intention. The tray twisted. The container slipped. And suddenly, spaghetti exploded across the floor like a burst pipe of red shame. The sauce splattered against the tiles, her jeans, and the leg of a boy sitting nearby. A beat of silence. Then laughter. Not the fun kind. Not the oops kind, but the kind that stings. Ooh, is that blood or lunch? Guess she brought her culture with her. Gross. It smells like dog food. Amira froze, her eyes locked on the mess. Her hands stayed suspended mid-air, as if time had frozen just for her. Her face flushed, not just red, but hot. Her throat tightened. Her fingers curled. She didn't cry. Not yet. That would come later. For now, she just bent down, without a word, and tried to scoop the mess back into the container with a folded napkin. Her small hands trembling. Her knees pressed against the sauce-soaked floor. But no matter how fast she moved, it only made things worse. The sauce smeared. The noodles stuck. The laughter continued. Some kids looked away. Most didn't. A few even pulled out their phones, pretending to snap photos. And then a sound. Not a shout. Not an order. Just the low scrape of rubber wheels on tile. Carl Anderson was across the cafeteria in under 15 seconds. He didn't rush, didn't scold, didn't ask what happened. He just wheeled up to the mess, reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out a hand-stitched handkerchief, white with blue edges. Slightly faded, he unfolded it slowly, gently, like it was something sacred. Then, without a word, he leaned forward in his chair, knelt as far as the metal footrest would allow, and wiped the spaghetti from Amira's hands. No one spoke now. Not the kids. Not the monitors. Not even the boy who'd caused it. The room didn't fall silent, but something shifted. The noise around them felt distant, like they were in a separate room. A moment within a moment. A secret carved from the noise. Carl dabbed the last of the sauce from her elbow. He didn't look up at the kids. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough. When he was done, he handed her the handkerchief. She tried to give it back. He shook his head. "Yours now," he said softly. "Keep it clean if you can. But even if it gets messy doesn't mean it's ruined." Amira looked down at the cloth in her hand, like it was something holy. And for her, maybe it was eyes at the edge, from across the cafeteria. A woman watched Marjorie Hastings' chair of the Millstone Parent Council. 2 children in gifted programs. A husband who donated to the school's technology fund. She was tall, immaculately dressed, with the posture of someone who thought slouching was a moral weakness. She didn't smile. Didn't frown either. Her lips just tightened, just enough to her. This wasn't a moment of dignity. It was a violation of image. A janitor, a dog, a child covered in spaghetti. Disruptive, unnecessary, messy. She made a note on her clipboard. 3 words: revisit custodial staff. The aftermath. Amira didn't eat lunch that day. Her tray was thrown away. The container gone. Her appetite had evaporated with the stares and the giggles. She sat in the hallway during recess, hugging her knees. Carl passed by once, didn't stop, just nodded. A small gesture that said, "You're not alone." Later that afternoon, when the final bell rang and kids bolted like birds from a cage, Amira waited behind. In the now empty cafeteria, she saw Carl wiping down the tables. Samson rested nearby, eyes closed, tail occasionally thumping against the floor. She approached him slowly, the handkerchief folded neatly in her hand. "It's clean," she said, holding it out. He smiled. "You didn't have to." "You didn't either," she said. Back, he chuckled, a low, gravelly sound. "Guess that makes us even?" They stood there for a moment, just a janitor and a kid. But somehow, in that moment equals the stain that stayed that night. Amira tried to tell her grandmother what had happened. Layla shook her head. "You must be careful. America is a country where shame sticks." "But it wasn't my fault," Amira whispered. Layla looked at her gently. "That doesn't matter. What matters is who gets to say it out loud." Amira didn't understand fully. Not yet. But deep inside, something in her heart decided. Maybe one day, she'd be the one saying it. Scene closing voiceover. Optional. There are moments so small, the world forgets them within seconds. But not the ones who live them. For Amira, that day wasn't just about spaghetti. It was about being seen, being defended, being told without words that she mattered. And for Carl, it wasn't about heroism. It was just what you do. When? You know what it means to kneel beside someone the world would rather step over. The school didn't have a courtroom, but the conference room on the 2nd floor came close. Glass walls, oak trim, a large polished table, and rolling chairs that squeaked just enough to remind you who was in charge. The room smelled faintly of lemon sanitizer and something else power in perfume form. That Friday morning, the usual parent council meeting was called early, quietly. It wasn't on the official calendar. There were no student representatives, no teachers, no cafeteria staff, and certainly no janitors invited. Just 4 people sat at the long table, their laptops open, their coffee still steaming. Marjorie Hastings, chair of the parent council, sat at the head, tapping her screen. Beside her was Mr. Dwyer, the assistant principal, who always looked like he was halfway through a nervous apology. Across from them sat Mrs. Ellis, the head of community engagement, and finally, Dr. Lowell. Principal, polished, polite, unreadable. They weren't there to talk about curriculum. They were there to talk about Carl Anderson. Marjorie was the first to speak. She placed her tablet on the table like it was a gavel. "I've received 3 emails and a voicemail this week," she began, all about the same incident in the cafeteria. Dr. Lowell adjusted his glasses, already knowing where this was going. "The lunch spill?" Marjorie nodded. "The janitor kneeling beside a child?" "Yes." "In full view of other students. During an unsupervised moment, and with ... a dog." Mr. Dwyer cleared his throat. "Some of the kids recorded it. It's already been shared in a group chat." Mrs. Ellis raised an eyebrow. "Shared as in ... to praise the janitor?" Marjorie didn't blink. "Shared as in memmed," she said flatly. "There's one with the caption, 'Lunch lady and the therapy dog save the orphan.'" Someone chuckled under their breath, then caught themselves. Dr. Lowell leaned forward slightly. "What exactly is your concern, Marjorie?" "Optics," she said, and precedent. "We can't have staff engaging emotionally with students in ways that might be misinterpreted, especially without parental consent." She said it like empathy was a liability. Mrs. Ellis shifted in her chair. "From what I heard, the girl was being teased." The janitor stepped in quietly, respectfully. Marjorie's lips curled, just slightly. "I'm sure he meant well, but that's not the point. The point is, we have protocols for a reason. Custodial staff aren't trained for student interaction, not beyond basic facility needs." Mr. Dwyer picked up a folded memo from the table. "Technically, the handbook states that non-instructional personnel are to minimize interaction with students unless there's a safety issue or emergency." Marjorie tilted her head. "And is a spaghetti spill an emergency?" No one spoke. Mrs. Ellis folded her arms. "Do we even know Carl's background?" Dr. Lowell answered quietly. "Military. Army veteran. Been with us almost 10 years. Number. Complaints until now." "Until now," Marjorie repeated, like the words tasted like power. "I'm not saying he should be punished. Just ... reassigned. Perhaps a quieter facility. One without children. Somewhere his presence doesn't become a conversation." The room fell silent again. Not because they believed Carl had done something wrong, but because he didn't fit the picture. Carl, with his old army jacket. Samson, limping beside him. That quiet girl from 3B, clutching a handkerchief with red stains that weren't just sauce, but memory. Too raw, too human, too off-brand. Marjorie tapped her manicured fingers against the table. "We're building a robotics program. We're being reviewed for a state grant. We want prospective families to walk these halls and feel excellence, not pity." Mrs. Ellis stared back. "So now kindness makes us look weak?" "No," Marjorie replied. "But misplaced kindness can look messy." Messy. That word had become the modern insult for anyone who didn't fit into a polished brochure. Dr. Lowell spoke again, his voice low. "What do you suggest we do?" Marjorie didn't hesitate. "Reassignment. We offer him a lateral move to the district warehouse facility. Less student contact, more inventory work. Still employed, still respected. Respected, but out of sight, out of the halls, out of the lunchroom, out of the kids' memories. He's not union," she added. "There won't be resistance, just a polite letter, a thank you. A clean transition. Clean, like bleach on a story they didn't want told." Downstairs, Carl had no idea any of this was happening. He was outside the front office, polishing the glass on the school's trophy case. His reflection shimmered faintly beneath the words. Academic Excellence, 2016. Samson lay curled beside him, snoring softly. Carl looked up at the ceiling. Above him, second floor. He didn't know what they were discussing, but something in the air changed. A heaviness. A pressure in the lungs. A silence he recognized. He'd felt it in military briefings, in government offices, in housing departments. The silence of decisions being made about you. Not with you. By 3 p.m. The meeting upstairs ended. No vote, no signatures. Just understanding. The kind born from status and unspoken agreements. Dr. Lowell would make the call. Marjorie would write the memo. Mrs. Ellis said nothing, but her silence didn't mean agreement. It was the silence of someone already outnumbered. The verdict was unofficial, but final. That evening, as Carl was locking up the janitor's closet, he noticed something under the door. A folded piece of lined notebook paper. No name, just a drawing. Crayon, a man in a wheelchair. A dog, a little girl holding a cloth. Underneath, 3 simple words, scrawled in uneven handwriting. You saw me. Carl didn't smile. Not really. But he closed his eyes, just for a moment. And when he opened them again, they were heavier, but brighter. Because upstairs, they were deciding where he belonged. But down here, with that drawing in his hand, he already knew. Sometimes judgment doesn't come in shouts. It comes in silence. In closed doors. In polite phrasing. In decisions dressed as favors. Carl Anderson didn't break a rule. He broke a pattern. And that, more than anything, made them nervous. Because when the invisible start to be noticed, people in power begin to feel exposed. It started with a knock. Not the kind that demands attention. The kind that almost apologizes for existing. 3 soft taps on the metal back door of Millstone Elementary, just after sunset, long after the kids had gone home and the halls had gone silent. Carl was finishing up the last of the mopping in the south wing when he heard it. He paused, listened. Another knock, quieter this time. Like the sound itself wasn't sure it belonged. He rolled toward the back, Samson trotting alongside. Him, ears perked. The old security light flickered above the door, casting a dull glow over the concrete. Carl opened it slowly, and there stood a boy, thin, maybe 10. Hoodie too big, sleeves hiding his hands, scuffed sneakers. Skin the color of cinnamon, eyes too wide for comfort. He didn't speak right away, just held something out in his hand. A photo, curled at the edges, black and white, faded, but familiar. Carl took it gently, unsure. It was a picture of Samson. Not how he looked now, younger, upright, alert. His full canine vest. In the corner of the photo, barely legible, Unit 3, City of Atlanta. Evidence Locker 674B. Carl stared at it for a moment, the weight of memory pressing into his ribs like a stone. Then the boy spoke. They said we can't keep him, he whispered. They said he's not allowed. My grandma got the notice. Carl blinked. Keep who? The boy pointed at the photo. Him, that dog. That's our dog now. Carl's heart paused. His voice dropped. Where do you live? 4 blocks from here. Oakview Apartments. Same building as Amira. My grandma found him outside last year. She took him in. Named him Hero. But now they say he's a violation. They said if we don't get rid of him by Monday, we're out. Carl looked down at Samson, then back at the photo, then at the boy. He understood now. They thought that dog was Samson. Same breed. Same scar near the right ear. Same eyes, but they were wrong. And they were using that mistake, or maybe pretending it wasn't one, to evict a family. Quietly, legally, like moving a pawn off a board. Carl sighed. "Where's your grandma now?" "She's crying." The boy said, "I told her I'd come here. I told her maybe you'd know what to do." Carl didn't answer right away. He just rolled back into the building, waving the boy in with a flick of his hand. "Come on, you hungry?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. "Name's Jaden," he said as they walked. "Yours?" "Carl." "Like Carl Winslow?" Carl chuckled. First time in days. "Yeah, something like that." He made the kid a peanut butter sandwich from the emergency stash in the custodial closet. Let him sit on the supply crate. Gave him half a bottle of orange Gatorade. Then Carl rolled back to the corner locker he hadn't touched in years. Not really touched. The one with the dent from the base fire in '04. He opened it slowly, like it might explode. Inside were folders. Military records. Deployment logs. Photos. Letters yellowed with time. And a laminated sheet he hadn't read in almost a decade. It read, Samson, K9 retired with commendation -2011. Beside it, a copy of his own discharge papers. Clean. Honorable. Stamped. Twice in red ink. Final assignment complete. He pulled out the file. Held it in his lap. Looked at Jaden. "Tell your grandma she's not breaking any rules. Samson's retired. He's certified. This dog in your photo? That's him. And this paperwork says he's a hero, not a hazard." Jaden's eyes lit up. "You mean we can fight this?" Carl nodded. "Yeah, we can." That night, after Jaden left, Carl stayed up until midnight. He made copies. Highlighted dates. Attached notes. Scanned everything too. A thumb drive a teacher once gave him just in case. Then he typed a letter. Not angry. Not desperate. Just factual. Steady. Like a soldier filing a field report. The letter began, "To whom it may concern, you don't know me. But I know what it feels like to be misfiled, mislabeled, and dismissed quietly. I was trained to serve. I was asked to clean. But what I will not do is stand by while others are erased for the sake of convenience. The dog in question is Samson. He served your country better than most politicians. He's not dangerous. He's decorated. And any attempt to remove this dog, or this family, under false pretenses is an act of cowardice, not compliance. I respectfully ask you to reconsider, or I will make this matter very, very public. Yours in truth, Carl Anderson, U.S. Army. Retired." When he was done, he printed 6 copies. One for the building manager, one for the school board, one for the superintendent. office, one for the housing authority, one for Mrs. Ellis, and one, folded neatly, for Marjorie Hastings. He placed them in envelopes, carefully labeled each one in block letters. Then he opened the bottom drawer of his tool cabinet and removed a small folded cloth dot. It was his old Army jacket. He hadn't worn it since the funeral of his commanding officer. Since the day they told him his disability claim had been denied. Since the day he stopped correcting people who called him just the janitor. But that night, he put it on. It still fit. A little tighter in the shoulders. A little looser in the sole. He looked in the mirror, not for vanity, for resolve. Then he pinned a tiny American flag to the chest pocket. The kind they gave out at parades, not worth much, but symbolic. A reminder that patriotism wasn't loud. It was loyal. At the bottom of the mirror, Amira's crayon drawing sat, folded gently. He slid it into the inner pocket. Samson barked once, softly. Carl looked down. "Yeah," he said. "It's time." Outside, the city was quiet. Rain had started to fall, soft and slow, as if even the clouds knew something was about to change. But inside that custodial closet, Something had already shifted. Not anger, not rebellion, but purpose. Carl wasn't just cleaning floors anymore. Was about to clear the record. And this time, they were going to hear him. Morning arrived quietly, wrapped in fog and the kind of soft gray light that made everything look a little older. The sidewalk outside Millstone Elementary was still damp from the night's rain. The edges of the street shimmered with puddles, and the smell of wet concrete hung in the air like memory. Carl was already at the school before the sun rose, unlocking doors with one hand while the other steadied the stack of folders in his lap. His old army jacket hugged his shoulders, his boots scuffed but laced. On the left pocket, the tiny flag. Pin caught the morning light and flickered just enough to make people look twice. Samson trotted beside him, alert, vest buckled, every step saying, "We are not hiding anymore." Carl didn't move like someone on a mission. He moved like someone who had done missions before. There was no hurry, no panic, just quiet efficiency. He stopped first at the teacher's lounge, slid an envelope into Mrs. Ellis's mailbox, and to the front office. Another envelope, clearly labeled, slid into the principal's bin. He passed the front desk secretary, who looked up and gave a polite, confused smile. "Morning, Mr. Anderson." He nodded. "Morning, Carla." She paused. Something about his voice. It had weight today. Like a bell rung slowly in an empty church. He rolled toward the mail slots near the main entrance. Last two envelopes. One for the district rep. One for Marjorie Hastings. He placed them carefully, like he was setting down glass. Like each letter had a heart inside it, back in the janitor's closet. Carl fired up the dusty laptop a teacher had donated years ago. The screen flickered and blinked to life. He inserted the thumb drive. His fingers moved slowly across the keyboard as he uploaded copies of the documents, military records, K-9 certifications, service photos, and the letter he wrote the night before. Then he opened the email client and typed 3 short messages. One to the superintendent, one to the Regional Housing Authority, and one to the City Council's general inbox. No drama. Just attachments. Just facts. When he hit send, he didn't exhale. He didn't lean back. He just looked at Samson and whispered, "Step 1's done." By the time the students arrived, the building buzzed like any other day. Kids poured in with backpacks half-zipped. Parents waved from car windows and teachers herded little bodies toward classrooms. But underneath that normalcy, something else was stirring. An undercurrent, a tension. Like someone had cracked a window, no one realized was stuck shut. Amira noticed it first. She spotted Carl rolling down the hallway, wearing his army jacket. Something she'd never seen before. He nodded at her, and she nodded back, eyes wide, lips sealed. That jacket meant something. Not just to him, but to her. It said, "I am not small. I am not a shadow. I have a name. I have a story." At 10:32 a.m., the front office phone rang. It was the superintendent's assistant. By 11:17, Mrs. Ellis had opened Carl's envelope, read the first paragraph of his letter, and quietly closed the door to her office. At 12:45, the principal stopped mid-conversation with a PTA volunteer, walked into his office, and stayed there for almost an hour. Meanwhile, Carl kept working. He mopped the same floors, took out the same trash, tightened the same loose screw on the second-floor stairwell railing. But today, something was different. People said good morning with a little more weight, a little more curiosity, a little more hesitation, not out of fear, but out of the growing sense that the man they never looked twice at might have always been more than he appeared. At 1:15 p.m., an email hit the parent council's internal server. From the district legal advisor. The subject line, "Carl Anderson, personnel review suspension pending inquiry." That was when Marjorie opened her mail slot, pulled out the envelope, and read the letter inside. No legal jargon. No threats. Just one line stood out to her, written in plain language. You may not remember my name, but you will remember the truth I carry. She folded the letter neatly and set it on the table in front of her. Then, for the first time in years, she felt her grip on the narrative loosen. She didn't say a word, but her hands trembled slightly. Back in the hallway, Carl finished wiping the cafeteria tables. Samson sat nearby, watching the door like a soldier on watch. That's when Jaden showed up again, walking in with a folded piece of paper in his hand out. He approached Carl slowly. Grandma says thank you, he said. The building manager came by. Said they're reviewing the case. That she can keep Hero for now. Carl smiled, just a little. Good. Jaden looked at Samson. You think he remembers me? Carl glanced at the dog. Samson remembers everyone worth remembering. Jaden grinned, then handed Carl the folded paper. I made you something. Carl opened it. Another drawing. This time it was of a school hallway. And in the center, Carl, Samson, Amira, Jaden, all standing side by side. Above them, in big block letters, the ones they forgot, but couldn't erase. Carl swallowed hard. He didn't speak. Some things didn't need words. That evening, when the last bell rang and the kids spilled out into the waiting arms of parents and buses, Carl sat alone in the supply closet. The light above him buzzed. Samson curled at his feet. He pulled out a second folder, one he hadn't touched in over a decade. Inside were more things they'd forgotten. Newspaper clippings, commendations, a photo of him, 20 years younger, holding Samson with one arm and saluting with the other. And then, in the bottom of the folder, the thing that broke him, a letter, written by a girl he once saved during a tornado drill gone wrong. A girl who had said, in shaky penmanship, you didn't just open the door, you stood in it so I wouldn't be alone. He folded the letter, closed his eyes, and for the first time in many years, Carl let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, dignity could be restored without shouting. Maybe truth didn't always need a bullhorn. Sometimes it just needed to be placed, gently, into the right hands. Carl had done what he came to do. And tomorrow, he'd show up again, not because they asked, but because he had more to say, even if he said it with silence. The meeting was already underway when Carl arrived. The multi-purpose room had been rearranged, rows of fold-out chairs lined up neatly beneath the fluorescent lights, the polished tile floors echoing every whisper. At the front stood a long table with name placards, coffee tumblers, and printed agendas no one really read. It was a scheduled community listening session, but everybody knew what it really was, a safe way to say they were addressing concerns without having to promise they'd fix anything. Parents trickled in slowly, most in business casual, some in scrubs, a few still in their delivery uniforms. Kids sat beside them with earbuds in, eyes half closed. Marjorie Hastings stood near the front, arms folded, lips tight. Mrs. Ellis sat off to the side with her notebook open, eyes scanning the room, as if waiting for something she couldn't quite name. When Carl rolled in, heads turned. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. He simply entered, as if this was where he'd always belonged. Not in the shadows of mop buckets and back hallways, but here, in full view, under the same lights that had never been aimed at him. He wore the same army jacket. The flag pin still gleamed on his chest pocket. Samson walked beside him, every step slow and certain, like an old soldier guarding sacred ground. The conversations quieted. No one had announced him, but he didn't need an introduction, because sometimes silence introduces a man louder than any name ever could. Dr. Lowell looked up from his papers and straightened his tie. "Mr. Anderson." Carl raised a hand gently. "I won't take long," he said. No microphone, no podium, just his voice, steady, low, like gravel wrapped in velvet. I heard this was a listening session. He began, looking out across the crowd, so I figured I'd speak. He paused, letting the room settle. "I've worked at Millstone for just under 10 years. Before that, I served 2 tours overseas. I saw things I don't talk about much. Lost people I still remember. And when I came home, the only thing waiting for me was a box of paperwork and a lot of silence." He looked down at Samson. "This dog right here, he saved 12 lives. Sniffed out explosives no human could have found. Took shrapnel in his leg and didn't stop moving. When they retired him, no one wanted to adopt an old, injured dog with PTSD. But I did, because I knew what it felt like to be called brave in one room and ignored in the next." A few heads nodded slowly. Someone in the back cleared their throat. Carl's voice didn't waver. "I didn't come here to talk about a lunchroom spill, or about a handkerchief, or about whether a janitor should kneel beside a child. I came to say this." He took a breath. "I see things you don't. I see the kids who eat alone. The ones who flinch when they hear yelling. The ones who look at Samson like he's the first living thing to treat them kindly all day. I see teachers trying their best with no time. I see exhausted parents who drop off their kids and pray they come home safe." He turned slightly toward the front table, and I saw what happened when I showed a little kindness in public. Marjorie looked away, her fingers frozen mid-note. I got pulled into a conversation I wasn't invited to. A conversation about optics, about image, about messciences. He paused again, letting that word sink in. "But here's the thing," he said, voice rising ever so slightly. "I am messy. So is every veteran I know. So is every kid who's had to grow up too fast. So is this whole damn city." A murmur rippled through the chairs, but no one interrupted. Carl continued. "And yet, we clean up. We show up. We carry burdens no one sees. And we still offer a hand when someone else drops theirs. That's not unprofessional. That's not inappropriate. That's humanity." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled sheet of paper. "This is a drawing a kid gave me. A kid you've probably never spoken to. It's me, her, a boy, a dog, and one sentence." He unfolded it slowly, holding it up with both hands. It says, "You saw me." The room was completely silent, not stiff, not awkward. Just reverent. Because everyone in that room suddenly remembered what it felt like to be small, to be overlooked, to wonder if anybody would ever call their name with warmth. Carl folded the paper, slid it back into his pocket, and looked up. "I didn't come here to beg for my job. I came here to remind you of something you forgot." He turned his wheelchair slightly, facing the crowd now. "You want a clean school? Teach your kids to clean their own hearts first. You want to protect your image? Protect the invisible ones who carry your image when no one's looking." He looked back at Dr. Lowe. "Whatever decision you make next, make sure you can say it out loud to every child who ever felt unseen. Because I will." He gave a nod, not a bow, not an apology. Then turned to leave. But just as he reached the doorway, someone stood. It was Mrs. Ellis. She didn't say a word. She just clapped once. Firm, sharp, honest. Then another parent stood. A mother in jeans and a Target hoodie. Clapped. Then a father with a mechanic's jacket. And then the whole room. It wasn't a standing ovation. It was a seeing ovation. And for the first time, Carl paused. Not because he needed their applause, but because he knew they had finally heard him. Not the janitor. Not the man in the wheelchair. Not the background character. Carl Anderson, a veteran. Protector. A man who simply refused to be erased. He looked down at Samson, who stared back as if to say, "Told you." Then they exited together. And though the meeting continued, nothing said after that really mattered, because the truth had already been spoken. And truth, once spoken, has a way of echoing, even in the quietest rooms. The next morning felt different. Not louder, not brighter, just steadier. As if something beneath the surface of the school had shifted overnight, realigned itself, like the slow turn of tectonic plates. Nothing looked different on the outside. A bell still rang at 8:05. The school bus still pulled in with a sigh and a cloud of exhaust. But the air held a stillness, not of silence, but of attention. People were listening now. Even if they didn't know it yet. Carl arrived early, as always. Same routine, same chair, same key in the side door. But this time, when he rolled past the front lobby, something made him pause. There, taped to the inside of the glass display case, the one that used to only hold trophies and plaques with other people's names, was a new sheet of paper, typed, centered, and underlined in bold. Facilities Specialist Carl Anderson, to 10 years of service and community dedication. Below it was a photo, not of a football team, not of a robotics club, but of Carl and Samson, taken just 2 days ago, mid-walk, mid-smile, mid-dash moment. It wasn't glossy or staged. It was real. Carl stared at it for a long second, then let the air fill his lungs slowly. He didn't need a parade. He didn't want confetti. But being acknowledged, being seen, carried a weight he hadn't realized he was still holding. He moved on, down the hallway. Kids passed him and said things they never used to. "Hey, Mr. Anderson. Cool jacket. That's the dog, right? The war one?" And then, from a little girl with braces and a cast on her arm, "Thank you for saying what nobody else would." Carl nodded at each one, said little. His strength was never in the noise. It was in the showing up. In the cafeteria, Amira sat with her lunch. Not alone this time. 2 girls flanked her, one offering half a banana, the other asking about the drawing pinned to her folder. Carl passed by without interrupting, just raised a hand as he rolled past. Amira looked up and gave him a smile. Not polite, not timid, but full, because something had bloomed inside her, too. Something unspoken that now had room to grow. Lunch. Dr. Lowell stopped by the janitor's closet, knocked once, waited. Carl opened the door halfway, not out of distrust, just habit. The principal shifted awkwardly, then extended an envelope. "We've officially closed the review. No action will be taken. In fact, we're adding a policy update, recognizing the role of support staff in student well-being." Carl took the envelope without opening it. Dr. Lowell cleared his throat. "Also, the Parent Council voted to dedicate the new reading nook in the library in your honor. It'll be called the Listening Corner. Kids can read there, or just be." Carl didn't say much, just nodded once. "Good." As the principal turned to leave, he paused. "Mr. Anderson, the other night, you said something I keep thinking about. You said you see what we don't." Carl tilted his head. "Yeah." Lowell glanced back, voice lower. "Maybe we should have been asking what you saw all along." Carl didn't reply. But in that silence, something was forgiven. Later that afternoon, Carl went back to the locker that held everything they once tried to forget. The folder, the medals, the notes, the letters, the photos. But this time, he wasn't looking to protect it. He was looking to share it. He pulled out a manila folder, carefully organized, and rolled down the hall toward the library. Inside, Mrs. Ellis was standing beside a small team of kids, arranging books on a new shelf. Bright pillows lined the wall. A window let in warm sunlight. A hand-painted sign read, "The Listening Corner, for every story that deserves to be heard." Carl handed her the folder. "What's this?" she asked. "My story," he said, "for the kids who wonder if they'll ever get to tell theirs." She held it like something sacred. "I'll make sure it's seen," she whispered. That night, after the school emptied and the sun melted into the horizon, Carl walked Samson out to the sidewalk one last time before locking up. The street was quiet, golden light stretching across the concrete like ribbon. A boy on a bike rode by and shouted, "Hey, that's the dog from the story." Carl smiled. "He's in a lot of stories." And then, as they reached the corner of Maple Avenue, the same corner where so many had once looked through him, a car pulled up. A familiar silver sedan. Amira's grandmother. She rolled down the window and said, "She sleeps easier now. She doesn't flinch in her dreams anymore." Carl nodded. "She's strong." "She's seen," the grandmother replied, "because you stood up when nobody else did." And with that, the light changed, the car moved on, and Carl looked up at the street sign he'd passed 1,000 times. But this time, he imagined. Second sign underneath it, dot. One not made of metal, dot. One that simply read, "Still here, dot. Because that's what this story was really. About dot not glory, dot not revenge, not even justice, dot, but presence, dot endurance, refusal to disappear." Carl. Anderson didn't become a hero in that school because he fought. He became one because he refused to stop showing up with gentleness, with truth, and with the quiet kind of courage that never asks for applause, but always earns respect. In the end, maybe that's all any of us ever really need, dot, to be remembered, dot, to be named, dot, to be told. You were never invisible. You were always still here. Asterisk. Carl never asked for recognition. He just wanted to be seen, dot, and in the end, it wasn't a medal that honored him. It was a child whispering his name with wonder. That's the power of presence. The power of standing firm, even when the world rolls right past you. If this story moved you, share it. Let someone else remember that kindness leaves echoes. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that reveal the strength in those we overlook. Because here, on this channel, we see the invisible. And we, REMEMBER, they were never gone. They were just waiting to be called by name.